One thing we probably should have asked earlier on. So this is the Pathfinder class. Why that name, and exactly what significance does that hold?
Well, in Star Trek Online, usually we name our new ship classes after previous examples of the class we're basing it on. So I'm trying to think of a good example. The like one of our new Defiant designs is named the Sao Paulo, right? Which is
Yeah.
the Defiant class that kind of replaced the Defiant after it was destroyed by the Breen. Um, for the Pathfinder, we had already done that. So we have a Bellerophon class, which is a long-range science vessel. And so that was really the only, other than the Intrepid herself, which was implied but never seen, the Bellerophon was the only other Intrepid ship I think we saw in canon, which was Admiral Ross's flagship in DS9. So we kind of tried to scratch our heads a little bit and try to figure it out. And so ultimately, we decided to name it Pathfinder after the program led by Reginald Barclay that brought Voyager home. If you remember, it was called the Project Pathfinder. So that's where that name came from.
So as I mentioned in the first part of this show, the Pathfinder has 3, 4, and 3 off-weapon slots. Well, Thomas, I know you've been waiting for this question. Talk us through her offensive and defensive capabilities in actual show terms, phaser banks, phone torpedo tubes, rather than weapon slots. And what is she capable of, and how powerful is she compared to, say, the old original Intrepid class?
In general, I'd say in terms of just number of weapons, I'd say she's pretty comparable to the Intrepid. I'd say that given that she's, about 30 years newer, she's going to be more powerful just because the weapons are more advanced. In general, I've sort of made the decision that Star Trek Online era phasers are Mark 12 or Mark 14 versus the Intrepid class as Mark 10 phaser strips. So you're going to see about kind of the same. You have your forward arrays, and then you have some aft dorsal arrays here and here. Similar things like here, a big belly phaser strip, and then strips in the saucer there and there. And about 13 phaser strips between the fore and aft. That's 5 forward if you count the belly as a forward array, and then 8 aft, which is really just because you're working with, phaser, lots of smaller phaser strips as opposed to the huge forward ones.
Limited firing arcs with those small ones.
Right. And you want to make sure that's something that Starfleet ships, I think, typically do, is they'll have a lot more aft phaser arrays, but they're a lot smaller. If you look at the Galaxy class, and I have a friend who's not really a Star Trek fan, that's a thing where he makes fun of Star Trek ship designs because they all look like they're designed to run away because they have more weapons on the back as opposed to the front. But anyway, so 13 phaser strips in total, and then I'd say 4 projectile launchers in total, 2 in front, 2 in back, just like the Intrepid. I would argue, given that this is in the early 25th century, that this thing by default is loaded out with quantum torpedoes. Now in STO, when you get one of these ships when you get any Federation ship by default, it's photons, but that's just kind of our default loadout. I think in lore, in real Star Trek, you'd probably see that this thing comes with quantum torpedoes.
I know we talked about that offline when I was sort of asking about the ship in sort of in pre. Is that going to be the standard because this is so far in the future? And at that point, only really Defiant, Prometheus, and Sovereign even had quantums. But that's a huge leap. I mean, the developmental period. So I remember I asked you back then, the Voyager, when she launched, she had 1 or 2 tri-cobalt torpedoes. What is is she on with that? Is that the equivalent of her quantum? Does she have a whole set of those? Or is it something above quantums now, since, again, 30 years later?
Yeah, that's interesting. In STO, since we had to make a lot of weapon types, we kind of took any sort of technobabbly energy type from the show and incorporated that.
Metaphasic, Polaron, Thalaron.
Yeah, transphasic, Polaron. Polaron, there are no Polaron torpedoes, I don't think, but there are transphasic torpedoes, chronoton torpedoes, photons and quantums, obviously, plasma torpedoes, that kind of thing. And usually the way we balance it out in the game is that usually there isn't a better option. They're all just different in how they do damage, right? So I don't know how you'd interpret that in the sense of like the show, if it matters. I presume that Starfleet is still kind of stuck with photons and quantums, especially if you think about after the Dominion War, they're spinning up a lot of old hulls that probably can only really support photon torpedoes. They're trying to they lost hundreds, if not thousands, of ships in the Dominion War. So that's say around 2380. And so after that, they're building a lot of new construction, which probably could field quantums, but they're also going to want to launch and equip as many ships as they can, as fast as they can. And that definitely plays into what's going on by the time STO takes place too, where at the beginning of Star Trek Online, if you make a new character, you're kind of dropped into the middle of a raging war between the Federation and Klingons, and there are lots of other challenges the Federation is facing politically, which usually devolve into force. And in that case, if you're trying to field, all these starships really quickly and get them on the front to deal with all this, it's sort of like, you're going to want, you could you could spend 5 years building a B-2 stealth bomber, but maybe what you really need is an F-16, like 6 F-16s, right? Like it's sort of, you trade off between the Navy and the Air Force do something called a high-low mix, where you have a really expensive air superiority fighter in the F-22, and then you have what's supposed to be, it didn't turn out this way, but was supposed to be a cheap kind of everyman assault fighter like the F-35, right? The F-22 was supposed to be the expensive one, and the F-35 was supposed to be the cheap one. Didn't work out that way, but anyway. So I imagine Starfleet does that with.
So does this
weapon
explain?
loadouts.
Does this explain why all the museum NX-01s are being relaunched?
Yeah, exactly. You got to get every all hands on deck, every ship we can out there. But in general, I could still see photon torpedoes being kind of run of the mill in the 25th century.
That's what I was going to ask. Is the Quantum to standard loadout by default, or does she have some photons as like the emergency set as well, or is it literally just quantums? Because quantums are quite substantially more powerful than photons.
Sure. And that's one of those things where you're probably just gonna, it sort of depends on how many Pathfinders they build and how friendly the admiral is with the quartermaster, when he's getting the ships for his squadron. If he's like, well, we have, Starbase 72 has 5,000 quantums on reserve, so you can fit these ships with that, but we also have 30,000 photons on reserve, so you guys are getting those instead.
Which raises a question for me that I've kind of wondered over our research. Do you think there are like standard photon launchers that can handle both quantums and photons, or do you think there's dedicated quantum ones?
Like the Sovereign had.
Yeah.
I always interpret it as just this is our launch system, and then we build every torpedo and probe we can to fit that system.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think the TNG tech manual kind of talks about that, how, because it's usually when they launch a probe, they launch it through the photon torpedo launcher, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I've always interpreted it, that it is pretty modular.
Yeah.
Now, I would assume that older systems can't do that, right? And so you might have, Starfleet might still be producing the Mark 6 photon torpedo from, the 2280s or whatever, 100 years old, but just because they still have 50 Excelsior class ships flying around and they need to arm those ships. So,
well, my thinking's always been that the older photon torpedo launchers can't handle quantums, but the new quantum launchers can handle anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So at launch, what was the Pathfinder's maximum speed and cruising speed? Do you think she's one of the fastest ships in the fleet, just as the Intrepid was back in her day?
That's another thing I asked you previously. What is the warp speeds 30 years later?
Right.
Is there a new warp scale?
Yes.
Now?
We're back to warp 5 because of the new warp scale.
Yeah, so in STO, that's interesting. We do have, you can get enough items and bonuses and traits on your ship that you can go up to warp 25 or something. Just because we have, whatever sort of numbers we use to calculate that, but that isn't necessarily translate to how I feel canon would be in that that era. I'm assuming that the warp scale has not been redefined yet. Maybe it will be soon with the whole quantum slipstream innovation. Like, I'm sure that's going to be a pretty disruptive technology as it sort of perpetuates. The numbers I came up with, which were pretty I'm just going to admit that I kind of pull them out of my butt because It's hard to get like objective factual progressions on these things. But I decided that her cruising speed was warp 7 still, and that her max warp speed was something like warp 9.998 for 48 hours. And so what I didn't have time to figure out was, is that good? I don't remember like how long the Voyager can maintain 9.975. I think
for
was
like
Voyager's
12
max.
hours.
Yeah. So one of the things Samuel kind of exhorted me to do was to not just make it about the speed, but also make about like how long can the drive sustain that operating at that level, right? Yeah. And then the other thing I said was, it can do quantum slipstream with an uptime downtime cycle of 15 seconds per 2 hours. So you can run the drive for 15 seconds, and then you have to shut it down for 2 hours before you can run it again. Again, I don't know. I haven't read the books where that drive is featured, so I don't know if that's actually how it works. It seemed to be on Memory Alpha that was talking about how you run it in really, really short bursts, and then you have to shut it down for a while. So
it's like having a car with nitrous. You can only use nitrous for short bursts, otherwise you blow up your engine.
I'm going to my advice on the whole warp duration thing, because at some point, every 9.9 is actually quite a steep escalation of speed.
Exactly.
It's not a little increment. So if you went 9.999, while it's a lot faster, it becomes more and more divisive, and who cares? But obviously, if you're trying to fly, same speed, it's like, think of it as in a car. Like if your car can go at the same top speed, but you run out of petrol, well, you're flying with a Sovereign, or Sovereign's trying to fly after you, and obviously if that's can only last a certain amount of speed, so it'll have to then drop down to warp. But you're still going at full speed, and you're getting more and more distance. So 48 hours becomes a huge, jump.
Right.
So cool. So one thing that stands out to me on the model, 3D model, is the RCS Thrusters. No longer the standard yellow of the past. These are now orange with glowing elements. So talk us through this new design. Are these the next evolution of the enhanced RCS Thrusters? And what is with that glow? Just to make it look a bit more cool, you can be honest with us, Thomas.
As far as the little glowy bits, I think there are a few things you could do with that. It definitely started because those were huge blocks of color, and I wanted to break them up a bit. And so I was like, well, I've got these cool glowy textures, I'll throw them on there. And then my reasoning for them became, these were sort of using kind of projected force field to direct the RCS gas, like the reaction control gas. Because so a reaction control thruster is just literally a thruster, right? It shoots gas out, then moves the ship, right? It's a Newtonian reaction, right? Typically, I think, looking at the design of the RCS thrusters we've seen in like the TNG Tech Manual and some of the drawings from Sternbach, those are just controlled by physical vents. And so I was playing with the idea that these light up things could have to do with, instead of using a physical vent, maybe it uses some sort of force field to quickly direct the thrust in a very precise way. Or maybe that kind of allows you to be a bit more maneuverable because you can adjust the force field more quickly than you can in mechanical vents. Maybe it makes the ship a bit more responsive when maneuvering. Maybe it makes it less prone to failure or clogging based on, space dust.
Another thing that I noticed was the main shuttle bay. Gone is the Intrepid style, which was just a simple rectangular door. For the Pathfinder, you've brought back the clamshell and what looks to be like a very Enterprise E style bay. Can you talk us through that design choice? And I'm assuming, given those larger doors, that it has a far larger shuttle bay with more capacity all around.
I really just like that clamshell bay. I like it a lot. It's very Star Trek. It harkens back to the original Enterprise. I definitely think the Pathfinder has a larger shuttle bay. I think it's designed to carry more small craft, and it's designed to carry bigger small craft than...
And its shuttles can fit through the door.
Yeah. My reasoning for that is that if this ship is designed to go and survey systems quickly, the best way to do that is when you get in system, use all your small craft. Like instead of sending the main ship to every planet, I'm sure there are planets that are just, like Mars or Pluto or something that are just basically rocky, they're scientifically interesting, but strategically there's not a lot there to look at. So you can spare your shuttlecraft or run about surveying those while the main ship goes off to the more interesting planets.
Nice. So when looking at the actual 3D model, one thing I did see is you included a warp core ejection hatch, but no landing legs. I take it that Pathfinder is not designed to land, and is this feature was this a feature that was less used in 24/9 time period as opposed to Voyager, which was designed to land?
So this one, you kind of got me. I wasn't really thinking about landing too much when I was working on the ship, and some of this, you can say is just limitations of our poly count budget for a game, right? If I had more polys, I could throw more hatches and things on it. Um, I could see the Pathfinder being able to land. I wouldn't necessarily want to take that away from it. It is bigger though than the Intrepid. One of the things about it landing, maybe that's another reason that the nacelles actually hinge up, is because maybe when it lands, they need to do that to offer clearance from the landing gear. So I think that it's probably a last resort kind of thing, like it was for Voyager, where we really don't want to do this, but we don't have any other option. But yeah, they're right now there isn't really any indication on the exterior of the ship where those gear might be, but I don't want to authoritatively say that it can't, because I think that it's still within that realm of possibility for it to do that if it needs to.
Well, to be fair, we have pictures of the USS Pathfinder, the original version of the type. Maybe the second iteration, the USS Moroni, has landing legs.
A very small detail that I can see, there are multiple escape pod hatches all over the ship, but in the middle of the secondary hull there are 3 hatches on either side that do not look like standard escape pods. Are these specialist life pods or something in the texture that just fills in the space? Maybe they're for the dolphin crew, like on the.
See, I thought that, but I didn't want to put the script.
They're actually there in the texture. They're part of the ship material, standard ship material. In Star Trek Online, and I can give you guys a sample. We actually do a thing where the ship material is broken down on a template, and so you have a primary hull panel, and it's just a long strip, and then you have a secondary hull panel, it's a long strip, and it's a tertiary hull panel, it's a strip. And so any sort of details we want to have in the ship, we actually have to model in. So like this black area, that's secondary paneling, whereas the white area is primary paneling, and then the model is actually cut along that line to get that separation. So on these different panels, we have just different details we include to fill in the space and make it look interesting. So those gray panels you're talking about are part of that texture. If I were going to assign a function to them, I mean, you notice that they show up in other places. In fact, right above where you see them, there are a few more. You could say that they are external maintenance equipment hatches, or maybe they are passive sensor receptors. There's lots of things we could say that they do, but ultimately they're there to kind of fill in the space and be a detail.
I did manage to semi-catch you out with that one then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I
thought about this one, guys.
yeah, it's one thing I never really worried about, because it is just a ubiquitous detail on the
nobody would be looking at the ship in the detail that.
But then it's worth saying that through this full episode, I've been thoroughly impressed. We've thrown everything we would for a fully designed non-game ship, and you've come with amazing answers. So it's nice that we can trip you up, but you've done an incredible job. It's just fun to be able to think of it and be able to approach it in the same way that you put that much thought in. So yeah. There's another one though. Let's talk bridge modules, or potentially lack thereof. At the top of this ship, we can see a solitary circle where the bridge would be, and 3 small hatches or potentially blast door windows on the front of that. Is this the bridge, or is she actually recessed? Talk us through the choice of having, or not having, the classic bridge configuration.
If you look close at those 3 hatches you mentioned, that's actually the exact same texture as the ones we were just talking about. So it looks good up there up front. I could definitely see it being either blast doors for the front, like the JJ Verse style windows, or they could just be sensors for the view screen, that kind of thing. That is the bridge module. It's just very intentional to be the bridge module. It is low detail because I wanted it to feel armored, and I wanted it to feel... ultimately, I had one that was more detailed there, but I had to pull it back because of the polycount budget. Actually, my original design for that bridge module had inset cuts, kind of like the Intrepids. I don't know if you look at the top-down view of the Intrepid bridge module, you'll see inset of like the skylight, windows and stuff. Yeah. I originally had that there, but I had to cut it because it was just too many polygons for what what my budget was. But I want it to feel armored. You notice it's kind of nestled in. I'll bring back the little thing here if it's helpful. It's kind of nestled in around this little That's kind of back of the saucer, and then it's sort of protected by the rest of the ship. The idea was that I didn't want to take away the fact that bridges and Starfleet ships are generally modular, and the fiction is that you're supposed to be able to take a bridge off, like literally remove the bridge from the rest of the ship and replace it with something else, depending on the mission requirements. So I still wanted that to be a possibility for the Pathfinder, but also have it feel more protective and combat ready than other bridges.
So is that literally the ceiling, or is there more a blade of armor, do you think, at the top that does mean she's really kind of on deck 2 sort of thing? Or is she that literally the ceiling?
I still feel like it's the ceiling for. I mean, maybe what you're seeing is the blast. Maybe there are windows there, but the armor is just closed now, and so maybe you could open that up and get more of a skylight on traditional Starfleet ships.
So, taking this design into consideration, what is your most favorite thing about it?
It's actually something you guys haven't mentioned. I'm kind of surprised you haven't grilled me on this. Is the kind of wings on the how the saucer swept back there, and you see little wings. It kind of makes the ship feel kind of Batman-y. But I mean, like it's actually separate, right? Like you can see it actually kind of comes out there, and what the function for that is I felt like maybe it was some sort of maneuvering apparatus for the slipstream drive, to allow the ship to make course corrections while still having that drive engaged. Also to stabilize the slipstream drive, so you have something that are essentially ailerons or something like at slipstream speed, and so that would all be done with magic science fields or whatever. But that's what those little plates, those little wings are for. So that's the thing I think is kind of cool about it.
Well, Thomas, since we missed that, is there any other little details or specific things that you really liked about the design that we didn't mention or see?
I think we've covered a lot about it. We talked about the secondary deflector. We talked a little bit about the aero shuttle. Sorry, I'm looking at the model right now, trying to decide if there's anything I want to call out. No, the fins were the big thing that I kind of feel is like one of the major features of the ship. We also have the little prongs in back here, which mainly were designed as a way to offer some sort of repetition between the fins. I didn't want to just have it in one place.
Thomas, do the flyby that I just can't do.
The sort of like that, or is it more like this?
All of them just.
All
just,
good.
Okay, well, so we'll end on then. What is your least favorite or thing you would change if you could go back and make another version, or even just little things you could do? Or you mentioned poly count. Anything you would put back in, even if you had more polys?
Well, this was actually my the first Starfleet ship I modeled for STO. And it was the first Starfleet ship that I had kind of designed by myself.
That's why we're covering it first, Thomas.
So I don't know. I think one of the things I think I would do is have more asymmetry in the design. If you look at the Intrepid, you'll notice that kind of on the spine of the Intrepid, there's some asymmetry going on where like the airlock's on one side, and then there's some other doodads and stuff on the other side. So the it's probably better if you just cut to an image of it, but the spine of the Pathfinder is very symmetrical. I did have an airlock door just like the Intrepid, but I put it kind of right in the center. So that kind of thing I'd like to I wish I could play around with that. I would go back and add some of the details I had to cut when I modeled it originally because of the poly count. Add a more complex bridge cake. That's what we call it. A cryptic is a bridge cake.
Icing to the cake.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I could do a better job of incorporating. Right now, I don't know if we can see that. There we go. The torpedoes are like up here, and then there's this protrusion here. That's a bit easier to see. So I think I'd probably incorporate the torpedo launchers with this protrusion instead of just having it above that, right? Just more cleaning up and refining the idea a bit more, things like that.
Now I want to just quickly say, because we picked this as the first STO ship to look at. But Stuart, what do you think about this design briefly?
I think it's fantastic. Like I said, I always liked the original prototype that or concept that Rick drew with the longer nacelles turned down. I thought that would be great for Voyager, and this takes that design and just kind of ups it. I love the detail on the hull, the coloring, the color scheme, everything about it. I think it's great.
Yeah, and obviously we talked about what we should cover first, Thomas, and you were showing me links, and this came up, and I was like, no, that one first. That one is such a good ship, and when you said you designed it, I was like, this is really fantastic. It's so differently same, interesting. I think, as you mentioned, like you amalgam different pieces from like the Excelsior and the Dauntless, I suppose, but these different pieces make it feel more legitimate. It's a harsh way of saying it, but it does fit in more for me. And I could totally see this being that next step in Star Trek world if we were to get there. I that's why I sort of jumped the queue, because I thought it was so good.
Sure. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, that's always been my goal working on Star Trek ships. Is I want it to feel like it came from the same art department that gave us the Intrepid or the Galaxy or the NX-01, right?
Well, all right, guys. I think that wraps up yet another successful episode. Really hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I sure did. Never really got a chance to play Star Trek Online as much as I'd like to due to time constrictions. So I apologize if some of my questions might have sounded dumb, Thomas, but it does make me want to get in-game more and play a little bit more after talking to you, though. So thanks again for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, and I'll do one more for the road.
Jealous. Thank you, Thomas. Always fun to talk to you and learn about these new Star Trek ships. Hope you'll join us again soon. But in the meantime, guys, please click that like button. As always, don't forget to click that big red subscribe button. It just helps us out so much.
Yeah, it helps you guys out because it keeps you abreast of any new episodes we release and keeps you guys in the loop. If you enjoyed the show, I hope that you'll find it in your heart to share this video around to all your Trekkie friends and spread the word about our little show. Or if you really love our show, please consider heading on over to our Patreon page and becoming a donor. That really helps us out with the time that we need to put this show together for you guys, for you all to enjoy. So.
Or if the monthly donation isn't ready for you, you can still help us out with a one-time donation at our website by going to Trekyards.com, clicking that donate button. So until next time, guys, I'm Connor Cookins.
I'm Thomas Maroney.
And I'm Captain Foley, saying see you all next time. And again, thanks so much for your time, Thomas. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks for letting me come on, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.